COVID-19 completely engulfed our world for 2 years. Now, nearly 3 years later, it feels as though life has returned back to normal. But how often do we really reflect on that time? How often do we, especially us artists, consider how much we've changed and how much that change can be attributed to the pandemic? The global shift from physical to digital was monumental, and it left a unique imprint on the artistic journey of each creative individual. We decided to try and find just exactly how digital art practices of individuals were affected by the pandemic, to see if a pattern emerged amongst people. This will be a short piece on the art scene during COVID, here in Ireland.
So to start our research, we contacted 3 media-based artists in Ireland. We also collected a survey from students to figure out how they reacted during COVID as well. To start, we're going to talk to Andrew Grace and see how he got on during COVID as a student.
Oh yeah, I was a student. I was in first year in 2020 in March, and that's when it was like, see you in 2 weeks, and then it wasn't 2 weeks. There's some bits I miss, like the physicality of like the likes of a notebook physicality. A form of a digital notebook, I feel, can be a bit daunting. I don't know. It like, of course, it's very accessible, which is fantastic. But I just, it was a fine thing, but it came to a stage where it just felt like a chore doing a digital notebook. 'Cause it was like, here's my notebook where I'm collecting all my notes, and then I have to shove them all into a digital form. But that's the way I worked. People work differently. Then within my practice itself during that time, obviously we all got very used to using a digital way of making. My work was predominantly quite digital. I worked on a lot of video, and that continued on through COVID. And then I got to final year, and I found different ways of, because we missed out on all of that physicality of making. We had the new opportunity to actually have that physicality in making, and I found myself working with materials I wouldn't traditionally use or known to use, and that really enjoyable aspect of testing and like being able to test and having a space to test was so nice.
Did you feel like coming from learning in COVID almost obligated to push that physicality more because you felt like you missed something? Or was it just a natural kind of progression in your own work, do you think?
I think it was both. So naturally, yes, it happened, but I also wanted to have the opportunity to test on materials that I wouldn't use. And look, that's kind of the beautiful thing about creating, is that you find out the ones that work, and you also find out all these tests that don't work.
I'm sure a lot of you had similar experiences to Andrew, where COVID might have affected your school life or even your art practice during college or school. But it wasn't like that for everyone. As an example, we interviewed established artist Niall Cullen, who had already started his practice when COVID hit. It's interesting to see how it might have affected him, and that's what we'll get into now.
So I know your practice is like pretty expansive. You kind of touch base on a lot of different mediums. But our angle is kind of about your time during COVID, maybe before and after. And was there anything like maybe during COVID, did you lean into certain ways of working? Or did you change after COVID and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, like 2 projects in particular come to mind. One was a show I did, and that was called Meditative Monitor, and that was a solo exhibition. And because galleries weren't really open, I went about it in a kind of peculiar way, where the way I showed the paintings was through this video piece that kind of guided people through viewing the paintings. The other piece that comes to mind it's called Ephemeral Monument, and that was, I called it like a projection mapped sculpture. That worked well because it was obviously outdoors. So a lot of people were able to see it. So yeah, like it definitely made me approach things differently. Like those 2 projects really.
Did you feel like a kind of shift in your direction for your practice, like once you were in COVID and maybe coming out of it? Was there like did the narrative change, or were you still pretty much like committed to what you were doing before?
Yeah, I think my practice has like radically changed since then.
And was there something that you found particularly challenging about having to sort of change the way in which you displayed your works, or was it mostly like a creative opportunity for you to do so?
I suppose it opened my mind up a bit in terms of using the internet as a space for like a finished work. And it maybe wouldn't have been so open to that before. Yeah, like I think it actually, I found COVID quite beneficial in a way for making work.
So for artists like Niall, COVID served as an opportunity to propel their practice in a direction that it was already heading towards, a digital direction. but others were less interested in changing. I say that because of our interview with Caroline. What is it that she said again?
Out, demons, out!
Yes, it was really exciting. I mean, those chatting prayed my gay away. Caroline was already an established artist before the pandemic, so the COVID didn't affect her that much. It was more of a nuance for her. The only thing she had to do is to adapt.
Yeah, she's an activist artist. She includes a lot of protests in her practice, but she was forced to use Zoom.
Which she fucking hates.
Yeah, but she managed to use it anyways.
Yeah, so I guess when you guys asked me about, I guess kind of making work during COVID, and I thought it was interesting just because I did this piece that was kind of very specifically reacting to the limitations of COVID. We were at the time when the elections were being held that would decide whether Biden or Trump would come into the White House. I was very threatened by those times. Looking back, it's quite innocent now when you see what's happening. They were innocent times compared to what's happening now. But I also thought it was a strange situation where our right for our bodies to be in protest had disappeared. And I always think that the body has a very particular place in protest. So I decided to become a body in protest. And to give an avatar myself so that people could do their own protests to me. So I was kind of live tuned into the Zoom call via OBS, and just plugged into Zoom, and anyway, got here, and various people told me to do various things, and at the time, not being able to travel very far, and also that you had to perform on Zoom or do something on Zoom, and I really hated Zoom. I couldn't tell you how much I hated Zoom. I hated how flat it was, how it flattened people's effect. It's just like I hated us being put up in these kind of boxed arrays. There was something very instrumentalizing about the whole visual look of it.
As you can see, COVID affected everyone in its own way. For some people, it was simply an opportunity to digitalize your practice, like artist Niall Cullen. Whereas for others, it was more of an inconvenience, like for Andrew or for Caroline. You simply had to change. You had to change how your practice was viewed. And we can see this from the survey responses as well. Everyone responded to it differently.
You can see here the variety of answers we received from artists in our survey. Something we found interesting was the jump in media and new media art after the pandemic. We had predicted this, but it was satisfying to see it show up in the numbers. A small thing to note too was the slight rise in fields such as jewelry making, writing, music production, and fashion. These practices, I find, tend to be done mostly at home, and many define them more as hobbies or side hustles rather than a fine art practice. This upward trend makes sense given many of these hobbies gained traction on TikTok, paired with our collectively increased time cooped up at home. It also goes hand in hand with the answers we received from people when asked if they found it inspiring to see other art practices moved online. 83.3% said that they did, and only 8.3% said no. The rest felt a variation between the two, mostly saying they didn't feel inspired per se, but that they learned a lot from artists posting online. Finally, what was perhaps most interesting was the near clean divide in responders when asked if they felt stunted or inspired creatively at the state of the world during the pandemic. This was one I definitely wouldn't have predicted, although now looking back, it does make sense. Some people may have felt depressed, hopeless, and unmotivated, but some may have channeled those negative emotions into their art, or may have felt exposed to a bigger sense of artistic community and inspiration online. Overall, very interesting stuff, and we felt that this survey did connect to the answers that we got from the artists that we interviewed as well.
I don't know about you guys, but personally, I was a bit surprised by the outcome of this. Obviously, COVID was tragic for a lot of reasons and difficult for a lot of people. But I think it's a testimony to art itself, and particularly the art community, that so many people could have such a positive outlook on it. Despite all of the difficulties, it was a chance to develop your art, it was a chance to innovate, and it was a chance to try something new. You can see this with the survey, and you can see this with the artists that we interviewed. And so I think it's important to, even in times like that, look for the silver lining and see what you can do about the situation.